This afternoon we have Governor Schreiber with us, who is going to have a presentation for us. There's going to be some time for some questions, some discussions, so we're very happy. It is with great pleasure I introduce to you Marty Schreiber, politician, publisher, author, lobbyist, 38th Lieutenant Governor, and 39th Governor of Wisconsin. Governor Schreiber, on behalf of St. Luke's congregation, leadership, staff, and pastors, welcome. And thank you so much for sharing your time and yourself with us. Please.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you, Pastor, and good afternoon to all of you. I'm really pleased that we would have a chance to be together. And I have not been back in Middleton for a while. Last time I was here, I was campaigning for public office. But there's no one here that was old enough to vote for me at that period of time. And so Pastor and I were sort of chatting a little bit, and so impressed with the church facility here, but also telling her that for much of my early life until I really got into law school, I was torn between going into the ministry or going into politics. And we both sort of agreed that both of them have their own individual challenges. But it's really special for me to be here. And for a long time, I've always wanted to be in the spotlight. And so here I am, and it's really special. So we're going to talk a little bit about my two Elaines. And I thought between a little visit and maybe a few readings of what Elaine wrote, and maybe a question and answer, and then we'd have a chance to share some thoughts and ideas. And I told Pastor that generally the program takes an hour. However, I told her, and I emphasized the fact that if I am talking and the room becomes empty, I stop. And no matter how much time is left, if it's 15 minutes or 45 minutes, I just simply stop. So make sure you feel comfortable. And having had a chance to, well, my first experience with dementia, that goes back to when I was campaigning for governor way back in 1978. And I was giving a campaign talk it was Eau Claire, Wisconsin. And I thought it was a pretty good talk until the end of it. This elderly gentleman came up to me and he actually pounded me on the shoulder. He says, "Governor," he said, "that had to be the world's most god-awful speech I've ever heard." Well, his wife was there, and she watched and she saw, and she was so embarrassed. Oh, she came rushing over. She says, "Governor," she says, "please excuse my husband. He's old and he's senile, and all he does is just repeat whatever he hears everybody else say." So in talking to you about my two Elaines, oh, by the way, you should know, and this is going to sound like bragging, but there have been people who have picked up this book and they started to read it and they couldn't put it down. And I don't know how many of you have ever gotten into a book like that, but I have, and it's really quite, and to think that it happened with my book. But I'll tell you how that came about. If we go back to January, not this January, not the last, but the January before that, we ran short of books. And I went to the printer and I said, "We need books as quickly as possible because we're almost out of books." Not only did he get the books done on time, but he got the books done ahead of schedule. And so what happened was, however, do you see how that's glossy? It's like a shellac or a varnish on there. Well, what happened was, he didn't let that varnish dry, that shellac dry, and it became sticky. So people picked up the book and they started to read it and they wanted to put it down and they just couldn't put it down. And so that's sort of my claim to fame. And so my two Elaines, though, first of all, before I go any further, I want to acknowledge the fact that my brother Bob, who is here, former high school track coach, younger than me, better looking, and the thing that hurts is Mom always liked him best. But Bob is with me today, and he drove with me, and so I want to just thank him very much, not only for the drive here, but as we talk a little bit more about caregiving and Alzheimer's, you'll begin to understand how important a wonderful sibling, friend, relative, how wonderful that can be just to help one cope and survive. So the first Elaine, that's the girl that I met when I was a freshman in high school in Latin class. And gosh, I knew right away that she was the one for me. And so what happened was we dated and we went steady and we got engaged and we got married and 4 children and 13 grandchildren, now 7 great-grandchildren. My friend, my advisor, everything that you could ever want or think of in a life companion. She would be the hardest working campaigner whenever I would run. Whatever thoughts I would have, she would follow. If we would run for political office and I would lose, she would never let me feel defeated. So that's the first Elaine. Well, the second Elaine began to appear some 18 years ago. And what happened was she began to get lost going to and from places she had been going to and from for the past 10 years. She was a marvelous cook, but she used to get her recipes mixed up so badly that the food would taste awful, and she would just cry. So that was the beginning of the second Elaine. So it's now been 18 years since first diagnosis. I was with Elaine this morning. She's at the Lutheran home in Milwaukee, and we spent breakfast together, and her world is very small, and in a way it might be good because she really doesn't understand the fact that she can't really help herself with any of anything, and is really existing with a hospital bed and a broda chair, and the hospital bed. And so her life is very small. And as I look back, I think about my 2 Elaines, and I think about the fact that there are even more Elaines. The Elaine right now that I am having sharing life with, and again in a different way, again because her world is so small. So anyway, what is important to know, I think, for the moment, or one of the things is, it was 18 years ago when Elaine was first diagnosed. At that time, Alzheimer's could not be cured, delayed, or prevented. We now advance, Alzheimer's cannot be cured, delayed, or prevented. There have been some attempts at trial drugs and so forth, but none of them have really worked out. I will tell you that we tried everything from the standpoint of any kind of advertisements and so forth, and I will just tell you that my conclusion is that I wish I would have saved our money. It did offer some false hope for a period of time, but nothing really that could sustain any kind of belief that things would change. Now, I want to share just for a little bit of what I think happens in the life of a person with Alzheimer's. If you can envision, for example, a funnel, and you put the small part of the funnel by your eye and you look up, and of course, because the funnel expands, you look up and you can see the blueness of the sky and the hope of tomorrow. As this disease progresses, that funnel becomes inverted, and now the large part is by your eye, and you look out and you only see a little bit. That then becomes the world and the life of the person who now is. It's so important for us to understand that, because I contend also that if Alzheimer's is bad, ignorance of the disease is worse. Ignorance of the disease by the medical profession, who does not understand that when there is a diagnosis of this disease, there become 2 patients, the person who is ill and also the caregiver. Ignorance of the disease by me, the caregiver, because I didn't understand the disease. Ignorance of the disease many times by churches, by parishes, by synagogues. Ignorance of the disease by communities, by friends, by neighbors, by relatives. This is not a chicken casserole disease. Hypothetically speaking, I have open heart surgery and people know I'm recovering, they'll bring me a chicken casserole. I have hip surgery, I can't get around, they'll bring me chicken casserole. With Alzheimer's, because people don't understand this disease, They step back because they don't know what to say, they don't know what to do, and it's really uncomfortable for someone who really doesn't seem to react in a normal kind of way. And when I say ignorance of the disease, I'll give you an example. And this is one of the reasons I wrote the book, because I saw a good friend going through this experience. As long as I tried to keep Elaine in my world, Elaine, it didn't happen on a Saturday, it happened on a Friday. It wasn't the Smiths, it was the Joneses, and it wasn't pink, it was yellow. As long as I tried to pull her back, there was increasing conflict and tension. Her life more miserable, but my life more miserable and frustrating as well, frustrating for her. Once I began to understand that there were two Elaines, once I began to understand that what was so important for me was to embrace this new person and let go of the person who once was. Now that's very, very difficult. It was a hippopotamus and a butterfly that fell in love with one another, and they're about to be married. And so the hippopotamus is thinking about how he was going to affirm the marriage, how he was going to consummate the marriage. And so he can't figure out what to do. He's in love with this butterfly, so he goes to see the wise owl. He says, "Wise owl," he says, "I'm in love with this butterfly. We're about to be married, and I want to consummate the marriage. Well, how do I do that?" "Well," said the wise owl, "what you do is you turn yourself into a butterfly." Well, the hippopotamus accepted that advice and began to walk away. And then it dawned, how do I turn myself into a butterfly? So he goes back to the wise owl. "Wise owl, how do I turn myself into a butterfly?" The wise owl says, "Get lost, Buster. I just determined policy. What I am telling you is policy. What I am telling you is extremely difficult. But what I am telling you also is that it is so important to join the world of the person who now is, and then to work to let go of the person who once was." Now, as I said, there's no cure or prevention or delaying of this disease for the period of time. But I want you to know, in Elaine's instance, that they actually think that she was getting better. Now, when Elaine was still at the point where we would have lunch together, we would go to the cafeteria. And we were sitting there one day in the cafeteria eating, and what happens is she begins to tell me, repeating how intelligent and how good-looking I am. Well, there was a doctor and a nurse that was sitting over here, and they heard her tell me how intelligent and how good-looking I am. And so what happened is they said, "Elaine Schreiber's getting better." So what they did was they wrote an article for the New England Medical Journal. And they said, "Elaine Schreiber is getting better because she knows that her husband is really intelligent and really good-looking." Well, they're no dummies at the New England Medical Center, because what happened was they wrote back and say, "You have to show 3 things where someone is getting better. You only show 2. Well, as happenstance would happen, the same setting, Elaine and I are at the same table a couple of months later, and the same doctor and the same nurse here. Now Elaine gets on one of these tangents. "How did we ever meet? How did we ever get together? How did we meet?" Well, I said, "Elaine," I said, "when you and I were freshmen in high school, I said, I fell in love with you right away. I know I wanted you for my life companion." And I said, "Not only that, but anytime a boy got within 50 feet of you, I bopped him on the head." She looked at me, she says, "You're a BSer." Well, anyway, I said, don't tell anybody that I'm a BSer. And she says, "No," she says, "it's too late. Everybody already knows." But anyway, so they heard Elaine tell me I was a BSer. the doctor and the nurse. So when they heard that, they knew that now they had these three things. So about how Elaine is getting better. So if you watch the New England Medical Journal going back into maybe March or April, going forward in March or April, you're going to see that this article is written about Elaine Schreiber getting better because she knows three things about me getting better. But I'll tell you another experience that Elaine and I had, and we were eating again, and this is along on our journey, and while we're sitting there eating, she began to cry. And I said, Elaine, why are you crying? Well, she says, I'm beginning to love you more than my husband. Well, I didn't ask her what's wrong with your turkey husband. I didn't do that. But the point of the matter is, what that showed to me was it was not necessary for her to know my name in order for our hearts to touch. What sometimes is very painful to caregivers and siblings and family members is when the person who is ill cannot remember the name. That's okay. Forget about it. It's not necessary for them to know your name. Not at all. Do you have a warm smile? Do you have a warm, friendly holding of hands? Do you maybe have a acceptable voice for singing anything? Do you have a chance just to talk and be gracious? It's not necessary. So, again, if Alzheimer's is bad, ignorance of the disease is worse. The importance of joining the world of the person who now is. Understanding that it's not a chicken casserole disease, and because of that, sometimes caregivers end up feeling that they're being deserted. If Elaine and I had friends maybe over the course of many years where our families would get together and maybe we'd go camping and canoeing, and that's what kept us together, children and so forth. Well, now all of a sudden Elaine is ill with Alzheimer's. Our mutual joining together is not camping and canoeing. They're still with the camping and canoeing, and I'm with, as a caregiver, with Alzheimer's. And because of that, I don't really understand why they don't pay more attention and why they don't visit more and so forth. They, on the other hand, because maybe I didn't explain my situation to them, maybe I didn't explain that it is so important for caregivers not to do it alone. Maybe I didn't explain to them that I really myself don't know how to handle the situation, because every day is a new day, and once you think you have something mastered, something happens the next day. And it's, again, another kind of a challenge. Patience. Patience is quite a challenge, and understanding. Elaine sometimes had the habit of putting the car keys into the dishwasher. And, oh gosh, that was so very, very frustrating. And one day, I couldn't find the car keys, and they were not even in the dishwasher. And so you become so exasperated. I looked and looked and looked. I was becoming so frustrated. And I learned that before you blame the other person too much about what is not going right, you check your own pockets. Because if you check your own pockets, you're going to find the car keys. And so what I also want you to know is that this disease will take us to places we never thought we would go. So I was elected to the Wisconsin State Senate going back to 1962, and from Milwaukee area, and one of my responsibilities was to serve on the Senate Education Committee, State Senate. And it just so happened that there was a meeting in Washington, D.C. that I was supposed to go to on behalf of learning and bringing back information. So if you would catch a 5:30 in the morning airplane out of Milwaukee, you would be able to fly to Washington, D.C., even with the time change, go to your meeting, and come back the same day. So that's what I decided to do. So now it's 5:30 in the morning, and 5:15 we're getting on the airplane. And as I am getting on the airplane, in front of me is this very distinguished, important-looking gentleman. And gosh, you could see he had a leather attaché case, and he was so, with one of these even bar ties that you can see people were having worn and so forth. So he gets on the airplane, and he said, does this plane stop in Detroit? Oh, she says, yes, sir. We leave here in Milwaukee, we stop in Detroit, passengers get off, passengers get on, and we go on to Washington, D.C. Well, he says, I have to get off in Detroit. She said, fine. No, he said, I have to get off in Detroit. She says, yes, sir. He says, look at, he says, I'm inclined to fall asleep on an airplane, and if I fall asleep and I don't get off the airplane, I'm going to miss a really important meeting. Well, she says, I'll help you. He says, do you promise you will help me get off of this airplane in Detroit? She says, yeah. He says, she said, sir, I will take care of it. Well, now we land in Washington, D.C., and here this distinguished-looking gentleman is getting off of the airplane. And as he's getting off of the airplane, he berates the flight attendant like I've never seen anyone berate anybody in their life. So as he leaves, I walk up to the I said, my goodness, to the flight attendant. I said, that man certainly is angry. And she said, he's angry. You should have seen the fellow I put off in Detroit. The reason I say that this disease takes us to places we never thought we would be. I never thought I would have the close kind of relationship with my brother. We were close before, but never like this. I have met wonderful people, other caregivers. I have met resident assistants who work at the nursing home. And a while back, this is right beginning of COVID, I fell in my home. I tripped on a throw rug, get rid of throw rugs, but I tripped on a throw rug, and I sort of busted a kneecap and a little bit of the arm. And so, but what happened was, in my recovery, I had to walk with a cane. And what does a cane do? Well, a cane gives you stability. It gives you comfort. It gives you confidence. It helps you walk straight. It keeps your balance. That's what a cane does. It helps you move forward. I've met many canes in my life, many people who I had no idea could be helpful and gracious and make a difference. And you have to be aware, and you have to look for those kinds of blessings in life, because they're there. And as lonely as the job of caregiver might seem to us, and as challenging as it might be, there are people who are, also caregivers experiencing that, and there are also people who at times in life just happen to appear on the scene to give you that extra kind of comfort and assistance, as if they would be a cane for someone who has a tough time walking. And so what I wanted to share also about joining the world of the person who now is. So when Elaine was first diagnosed, the doctor says there are 4 things you should do. One is Numenda and Aricept. We did it, and I don't know, there's some discussion as to whether or not it can actually delay the symptoms. It cannot delay the progress of the disease, but delay the symptoms. Then also socialization, that is very important to continue to maintain that contact. And then also walking, which is the best exercise for the brain, and also a glass of red wine every evening. Elaine got 4 weeks ahead with the glass of red wine every evening and 3 weeks behind with the walking. But anyway, we would go for a walk, and my mentality was get this walk in a half an hour so that we can go on with life. And as we would be walking along, she would say, look at that beautiful flower, or look at the bird. Come on, Elaine, you know I had this half an hour time frame. What I'm saying is that we can, as caregivers, understanding this disease better by joining the life of the person who now is, have these kinds of moments of joy that maybe otherwise we would never think of having. Maybe without Elaine being sick, we would have to go all the way to the Swiss Alps to take a look at something that was beautiful. We were able to look at something that was beautiful on a simple 15, 20, half an hour walk just by being together. And so, yes, to be a caregiver is a very difficult challenge. But there are also things that we can do to look for ways for life to be better. I want to stress also that caregivers cannot, must not, should not be so egotistical that they think that they can do it alone, because you can't. Because, as I mentioned before, every day is a new day, and because of that, you just about think you have it mastered, and now something else goes wrong. What happens is then, because something else is going wrong, you try and work harder. So maybe you skip going to the gym, or maybe you skip meeting with friends, or maybe you have trouble sleeping, or maybe you don't get a proper diet. And all of a sudden, these things begin to mount up, and you become irrationally irritable. But also, not only that, but the more tension that your body develops, it develops a chemical called cortisol. Cortisol is sort of the chemical that they tell me is released before flight or flee, before adrenaline. You get too much cortisol, it's going to put on weight. But not only that, it's going to affect your nervous system. But not only that, it can lead to dementia. And so what kind of caregiver am I if I let myself get run down and irrationally irritable, where I can't be patient with Elaine, where I can't be understanding the opportunities to look for better kinds of situations that give us both these moments of joy. And so what I think we'll do now is I want to read a few of Elaine's. Oh, I should have mentioned this in the beginning, but so I write this book because I think if Alzheimer's is bad, ignorance of the disease is worse. Because I saw people argue with their loved ones, understanding that this is a different person and there's got to be a better way than handling it that way. And so I felt pretty good about that, writing. And lo and behold, maybe 3 weeks before we're ready to go to print, I find a series of notes and diaries that Elaine had been keeping since her diagnosis. And I want you to know that before I read these notes, we had prayed together and we had cried together, but never did I understand the courage that it takes to be diagnosed with this illness and then to move forward. I wish I would have understood that better, because I think I could have been more patient and I think I could have been more understanding. But the fact of the matter is, I got tied up in thinking I could do all of this myself. I didn't get the proper kind of sleep. I didn't get the proper diet. I didn't do all of the things that one would do for a healthy life, and it had its repercussions. But anyway, so I went through these notes with my daughter Christine and daughter Kathy, and we pulled out some of the more, what I would consider, notes that might give us a keener insight. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through a few of the readings of her notes, and then we will have a question and answer session. And what we'll do with the question and answer session is if you ask a question, I will try and repeat it. And I am a little bit hard of hearing, and so I may ask Pastor for some help in that. But I will try and repeat the question so everyone can hear it. If you ask me a question that I do not know the answer to, I will rephrase your question so that there will be no question that you can ask me that I won't be able to respond to. So then after that, I'll do a few readings, and then before the question and answer session, we're going to talk about prayer, persistence, and patience. We'll talk about that for a little bit, and then we'll get into the question and answer session. So what I'm going to do is share with you what Elaine might have been going through. So this was one of the very first things that she did when her diagnosis was made, and she wrote a letter to what she called her dear loved ones, meaning to me and the children. But she writes, "It wasn't until a few weeks ago that I really had to say, yes, I do have Alzheimer's. I had read of signs that indicate Alzheimer's, like getting overly upset for no reason and having trouble with names and directions. But I still didn't think it was a problem for me. But in hindsight, for too long, I've been getting lost driving, having trouble keeping days straight, and difficulties with names and schedules. Still, I still felt I could handle it. It won't get worse." But this morning, I started reading about the mid-stage of Alzheimer's in hopes of preparing myself better, and realized I'm not very far away. That is most scary, but I have to accept it. So what is happening is, as she's going through this, I didn't realize how much she was so dependent upon me. Of course, that's easy to understand if we look at it rationally, someone thinking that they're not going to be able to remember, and who do you look to but the ones closest to you? And I really didn't understand that as thoroughly as I could have. But Elaine wrote me a note just on a stickum. She writes, "I would be so lost without you, so please continue to take good care of yourself for me as well as for you." And again, to caregivers, you have to take care of yourself. You have to take care of yourself for your loved one, but also for yourself. You should know that there is, unfortunately, a high percentage of caregivers who die before their loved one due to the increased anxiety, tension. Also, I think the depression and also grieving. One of the challenges, one of the difficult things about being a caregiver is this whole situation of unacknowledged grieving, anticipatory grieving. So I had a friend who retired and enjoying retirement, and what he did was he had dinner one night, he laid on the couch, massive heart attack, and he died. Tragic, very quick, snap of a finger. But what happened was there was a funeral service. People came by to express their sympathy, to tell them how much they shared his loss to the family and so forth. And there was closure. There was closure. But what makes the challenge of a caregiver so difficult is there is never closure. So right now I am a widower with a wife. And my wife is still there. I still love her, but her world is very, very small. So I have to acknowledge that there is this grieving that I have to confront. So we caregivers have to do that. We can't shovel it aside. We can't, if we ask ourselves, why are we not feeling as good as maybe as even the situation would dictate, it could be very well that we just simply are not coming face to face with the fact that we're going through this grieving and this depression process, and we've got to do it. Because unless we do it, it makes it even that much more difficult. So anyway, so she told me how I should take care of myself, and she writes, "Marty is still a very good husband, and I can't blame him for being a little short sometimes. It has to be a problem for him. It puts more responsibility than he can handle sometimes, but he knows I'm trying my best and tries hard to help me. I know it's no easier for me than for him." And so what I wanted to show you is this one. I sort of got a kick out of this. Even though I told you how much she wanted me to take care of myself, she writes here, she says, "I'm not enjoying my role anymore as Marty's wife. Because of his having concerns about my Alzheimer's, he doesn't let me be me. He doesn't let me go for a walk if I want to, or to the store alone. I used to appreciate him, what I thought was concern, but he holds me captive much too much. I'm going to try to have a second opinion, because I really don't think I have any problem. I know how to drive or walk any place I want to, but he doesn't believe me, and I hate the control he has placed on me. I don't even think I have Alzheimer's per se." There's two, what you would call two pivots that I would make reference to. The one pivot is where I, as a caregiver, acknowledge the fact that I need to embrace the person who now is and let go of this person who once was. It doesn't happen with the snap of the fingers. It sometimes happens very gradually. Sometimes you think you made it, but then you really didn't, because you still want to hang on to that person who once was. That's one pivot. But then there's the other pivot for the person who is ill. And as Elaine is going through the process of trying to deal with this disease and also knowing that she really is sort of okay, it's a very, very tough time for her, for any Alzheimer's patient. And finally, when her own world enveloped her, there was less tension, and there was more of a easy feeling for her than otherwise, because she no longer has those kinds of worries about what the future might be holding for her. And so I'm going to read my favorite one, and then we're going to talk about prayer, patience, and persistence. But this is my favorite one. She wrote this one here right July 3rd, going back. But she writes, life is good, and I plan to have it continue that way until my children tell me it's time for a nursing home or something like that. This is realistic with what my Alzheimer's book says about my future. But till then, I will try my best to be normal, whatever that means, and keep my happy side of life always continuing. I'm lucky to have such a good family and many friends to help me get through all this. And so another great day to thank the Lord and smile, smile, smile. So prayer, persistence, and patience. This lady had this parrot. And all this parrot said all the time, Polly wants a party, Polly wants a party. That's all the parrot said, Polly wants a party. Well, she's expecting some important people to come over to her home, and she was thinking, how embarrassed is she going to be when all the parrot says is, Polly wants a party, Polly wants a party. She's so worried about it that she goes to see her minister. And she says, Pastor, she says, I don't know what to do. I have this parrot, Polly wants a party, Polly wants a party. And my friends, they're going to think, what do I... The pastor said, this is like a miracle. He says, I myself have 2 parrots, Peter parrot and Paul parrot. He said, I've had them for 7 years, and all they do is pray. They pray every minute of every hour of every day of every week of every month of every year. For 7 years they've been praying. And what we should do is take your parrot and put it in with my parrots, and my parrots will be a good influence on your parrot. And so they agreed. The lady went home, got her parrot, brought it over to the home. Sure enough, they opened up the cage and they put the lady's parrot in there. Lady's parrot, Polly wants a party, Polly wants a party. Peter parrot looked at Paul parrot and said, our prayers have finally been answered. So why don't we open it up for thoughts, ideas, questions? And I should give you a disclaimer, okay? All I have talked about is what I have learned in the course of my journey. And so I can only offer you my experiences and the experiences of others that I have learned from. I am not a medical doctor. I don't profess to be a neuropsychologist or anything like that. So, and then also with the question and answer session, if someone does have a question and one of you in the audience has something that you think might be added to it, that's great. Well, we can try and do that. So we can open it up if you do have any questions.
First, should we give Governor Schreiber a round of applause? Thank you very much. Wonderful. If you have a question, just go ahead and raise your hand up high, and we'll bring you a microphone.
You said that that Elaine is currently in a facility in Milwaukee, and I wondered, what was the turning point? What made you decide that that needed to be the option rather than caring for her at home? What were the signs? What were the signals?
And as I understand the question, what was the deciding factor of Elaine going into assisted living?
That's right.
Is that it? A couple of things. First of all, I went to counseling. I finally got it in my head that I couldn't do it alone, so I'm going to counseling. And I know that the time is coming, and I hated it. I hated the thought. But anyway, so I'm with my counselor. I said, I just cannot see putting Elaine into a nursing home. I can't, and the key word being putting. The counselor says, you are not putting Elaine anyplace. You are giving her an opportunity to be who she is now. Can Marty Schreiber's 24/7 nursing home care take care of her? Absolutely not. I could not do it. I was an intervention. My 4 children sat me down and said, Dad, you're going to be dead before Mom unless you do something. And that also was a factor. And then also the counselor pointing out that you sort of look at the health like a balance scale. And on one side you have the person who is ill, and on the other side the caregiver. When that gets out of whack and either the life of the person who is ill or the life of the caregiver is at risk or health, then it's time to make a move. it was the most difficult, excruciating decision and experience. And I can remember, it was, if we go to Labor Day 6 years ago, that's when Elaine, 5 years ago, because we're going on, so 5 years ago, this Labor Day, the day after. And so up until that point, we had been going to classes because Elaine did not want to go to daycare, but she was willing to go to college class. And so she did that with a spiral notebook and so forth, and the help of the people at the daycare. So it came time, so instead of taking her to the daycare, I took her to the assisted living. And when we're leaving our home, our condo, I'm ahead of her, and I left the door open, and she followed me, and she left the door open. And I didn't have the heart to ask her to close the door because I knew that that was the end of our life together and that situation. And so the people at the assisted living were wonderful. We had moved in some furniture earlier, mementos and so forth, which I think was very helpful. And they are doing now a simply wonderful thing. My life is better because of this. Elaine's life is better because of this, for sure. Now, I can remember that the day was bright and sunshiny, so I'm leaving. I had dropped Elaine off, and I'm leaving, and I go into the parking lot, and here there is one of Elaine's classmates, so to speak, a gentleman, and he looked at me, and he could tell I was down in the dumps, but anyway, so he looked at me, and he said, he said, that's a beautiful blue shirt you have on. I said, wow. He says, could I have that shirt? Well, I happen to have a shirt hanging in the car. I said, sure. So we walked over to my car, and I took off the blue shirt, and he put it on over his other shirt, and then I put on another shirt. And so he says, I really love this shirt. And now some people say I was really nice giving him that blue shirt off my back, but the truth of the matter is I had just held up a 7-Eleven store, and they were looking for a short, fat guy with a dark blue shirt. And now they had this tall guy with the mustache, and so I'm still home free. I made up that last part. But not the fact of the shirt, but just the 7-Eleven store. It was a quick trip. So, but anyway, it's a very difficult decision, and it's very difficult. But it has to be done.
Other questions?
Hi. I haven't researched this, but is dementia and Alzheimer's one and the same?
Is dementia and Alzheimer's the same thing?
Oh, that is just such an excellent question. That is a very, very important question. Okay, dementia is like an umbrella. Cancer would be like an umbrella. What kind of cancers are there? There's skin cancer, there's the breast cancer, there's lung cancer, and so forth, okay? So dementia basically means the mind is not working right. Well, why is the mind not working right? It could be because of a mix-up in medications. It could be because of an infection. It could be because of depression. It could be because of Alzheimer's. It could be because of an operable brain tumor, or who knows. So if you have Alzheimer's, you have dementia. But if you have dementia, that does not necessarily mean that you have Alzheimer's. So it is very important that you work to get a proper diagnosis, because sometimes we get overly concerned and we jump to conclusions, and I've heard stories already about it was an infection, or it was actually an operable brain tumor that cleared up the problem, and so forth. So in a sense, they're sort of the same thing, but only the diagnosis will show whether or not that dementia is Alzheimer's or some other cause.
My dad and my aunts and my grandmother all had what we think was Alzheimer's, but we were never sure of it because of some of the things that my grandmother did. You have a sense of humor, but my grandmother, which was when she had it, she went back to her childhood. And I'm wondering if that's dementia or if that's Alzheimer. One of the incidents she had was somebody had given her some dolls, and a couple of them were girls and one was a boy doll. And she went into the bedroom and she yelled at the dolls saying, "You kids are not supposed to be in the bed together." And that's as if she was being a mother at the same time as she was being a child, remembering all this stuff. Anyway, I guess the roundabout question is that dementia, would you say, or is that Alzheimer's? And is Alzheimer's caused by an accident to the head, or is it a situation where it's totally hereditary?
I'm going to have help with that.
Sure. He just described a situation with his grandmother, who sort of seemed to go back to her childhood in her dementia. So he was wondering, is that dementia? Is it Alzheimer's? They'd never had a diagnosis, so they weren't sure. And then wondering what causes Alzheimer's.
All right, the question is, what causes Alzheimer's? What causes dementia? Dementia, as I said, can be caused for a number of reasons. You can get a mix-up in medications, the Lewy bodies, and so many reasons for what might cause dementia. They think that what causes Alzheimer's is that a plaque forms around different parts of the brain, and that keeps it from operating. But the fact that they cannot come up with a medical answer to it means that they just don't know exactly what causes it. And that's what makes it's so important for us to understand this disease better, because we're going to have to live with the current status of there really not being a cure for it at this moment in time. So I hope that helps.
Is there a hereditary element to it?
Is there a that also is a very good question. Is there a hereditary aspect to this? My daughter Christine was extremely concerned about the fact that if her mom had it, she might have it. If a parent has Alzheimer's, whether the children get it is a factor. Okay, if the parents have it, it's a factor as to whether or not the children might get it, or whether it might be hereditary. But smoking is a factor. Improper diet is a factor. Not taking care of yourself physically is a factor. Not getting enough sleep is a factor, and so forth. And so more and more, they are learning or promoting the fact that your best way of avoiding Alzheimer's is to take care of your health, whether it's sleeping, and whether it's tension, whether it's diet, whether it's exercise, and so forth.
Great, thank you.
I was just wondering, when a family suspects someone, has dementia or Alzheimer's, what's the process as far as with the doctors? Is it just a test that, the remembering, certain facts, whatever, and is it a physical test that the patient goes through, where they actually can look into the brain and they can see if there's deterioration somehow? I would like to know more detail of what the process is that would determine the person has some difficulty.
So what's the diagnosis process?
The question is, how could I possibly have lost the election for governor back in 1978? Next question. So the question was, as I understand, how can you really make sure you get a proper diagnosis? In Elaine's instance, there was what they call the mini mental test. What day is it? When is your birthday? Who's president of the United States? And so if your score is 30 or above on this mini mental test, you're all right. if your score is 30 or below, you have dementia, maybe even Alzheimer's. So when Elaine was tested, she was at a 28. And so what happens is it does not progress 28, 27, 26, 28, arithmetically. You could be at 28 for a while, and all of a sudden it drops down to a 22, meaning that you have less awareness and so forth. So that is what Elaine had. Now, there are many more other not many more, but there are other types of tests that can give you more of a scientific answer than just this mini mental test. But the symptoms that Elaine had seemed to be so obvious to me and to the people we were working with that it was not necessary to get involved in a lot of additional other kind of testing process. She did have a CAT scan, and that really didn't show too much conclusive one way or another, but it was the mini mental test, but then also her actions, how she got lost and so forth. Does that help you?
Did you notice whether she changed over time, or was she, during the day would there be times when she was tuned in and other times when she wasn't? Because in Parkinson's, it comes and goes. It's dramatically different, sometimes in the morning, sometimes in the afternoon. But in Alzheimer's, is it pretty steady throughout the day?
All right, I'll try and, so as I said, Elaine had the mini mental test, so she was at 28. And it did not go down arithmetically, 28, 27, and so forth. So she would be at 28 for a while, and then she would drop down to like maybe a 24, which means then that her mental capacity and memory, dropped, and so it was a new type of challenge then for both of us to learn to adjust to that new situation. I mentioned what I called the pivot earlier, where Elaine finally was out of the realm of understanding reality versus her illness into her own small world of her illness. And so, and I also, in the writings that I read of Elaine, where she thought maybe she had Alzheimer's, then she didn't want to be my wife anymore because she felt good enough, and then she needed more, so forth. So it just does not go down this way. You could this way pop down a little bit, maybe pop up a little bit, and so forth. So there is no charted course on that I know of. I hope that helps you.
Is it true that your short-term memory goes first and not the long-term memory? Is that overall true of Alzheimer's?
Yes. The question is does the short-term memory go rather than the long-term memory? That has been the experience of many, many people, that the short-term memory goes first. Like I mentioned, for example, not remembering my name. And I wanted to caution everyone here who's a caregiver or knows of a loved one with Alzheimer's, forget about the fact that they forget your name. They don't need to know your name. And you don't need to know that. Anyway, but they can withdraw things way in the past. And again, no two situations I don't think are ever identical, but in general, you can say that the short-term memory is what goes first. So she was able to, know the children's birthday and so forth, but she would get lost driving to and from places that she'd been going to and from for the last 10 years, short term. So versus the long term. So.
I want to piggyback a little bit on Gordy's question and your response. Could you talk a little bit about sundowners? Are you familiar with that phrase?
Sundowners, the phrase sundowners. Are we familiar with the phrase sundowners? I'm not sure.
A sundowner?
Sundowner.
Yes.
Okay, no, I do not know enough about sundowner disease to be able to talk about it. I know that when my dad was in the nursing home, at certain times of the month, he would get really unique in his activities, but I would not want to venture into that to give you any kind of thoughts that might impact you, because I already told you more than I know.
Okay. My father had Alzheimer's probably longer than 9 years, but we knew he had it for 9 years, and he was in a nursing home. And we went to visit him many times in the winter about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and the nursing home staff said he was sharpest at that time of the day and understood a lot more than he did at other times of the day. And they referred to that as sundowners.
So it was pointed out that your dad had what you call my sundowner's disease, where at certain points of the day he was really sharp and alert. Yeah.
Yes.
Boy, to live for those moments, huh?
A friend of mine's husband was diagnosed with Alzheimer's at a young age, and at the time I had heard that the younger you are, the faster the progression of Alzheimer's. Are you aware of that?
Okay, the point was made that the younger you have Alzheimer's, the quicker it progresses.
Yes.
I've not heard that. I've not heard that. Elaine was 63, and so she's had it for 18 years, so I don't know if we consider 63 years of age young or old, but that's her progression. And the average length of life of someone once diagnosis could be between 5 to 7 to 8 years. That's generally the average.
Elaine's health like now? Hello, what's Elaine's health like now? Like you say, she's in an assisted living. She goes from her chair to her bed, but she's probably getting good meals. Can she walk? Is her life expectancy long, short?
So what's Elaine's overall health like now?
Oh, Elaine is very healthy. She had a little bit of the sniffles this morning and a cough. And when you have a loved one like that, you almost go back to when your children were like 6 or 9 months and they had a cold and a fever and you couldn't really do anything about it, with the cough and so forth. But no, overall, quite healthy. Overall, quite healthy. And her skin, just an amazing complexion. And so she's pretty healthy.
Maybe I have one more question, time for one more question. Did anybody who hadn't had a chance to ask a question have one yet? Okay, let's just get someone who hasn't had a chance.
Hi. There are 5 of us here today that are on a board from the Performing Arts Center, and mine isn't a question. Mine is an invitation. On June 15th, we are going to be putting on a show with a big band, and the show is going to be for people with Alzheimer's and their caregivers. It's a free concert. I'd like to invite you to come, and maybe you could bring Elaine.
Well,
we know that we did this once before, and we know that music is one of the last things to go. And the people were tapping their toes and clapping, and we put the words up on a screen, and they were singing along, and it was absolutely the most wonderful thing I've ever been involved in.
Great. And when is this?
June 15th.
June 15th.
2 o'clock in the afternoon on a Wednesday.
2 o'clock in the afternoon on a Wednesday, and where will that be?
At the Middleton Performing Arts Center at the high school here in Middleton.
So did everyone get that? June 15th, 2 o'clock at the high school. So thank you. And the point of what was made also with that invitation is how important music is. Oh, Elaine loves Patsy Cline. I tell you, that's just really important. And another favorite is Sing Along with Mitch Miller. Anybody remember? Oh, all the old favorites. Oh, gosh, so wonderful. Now, it's my understanding that the church has purchased these... a number of these books, and I don't know what the financial situation
Yes,
is.
and they are back on the table. You're welcome to take one, and if you'd like to make an offering, there's the offering plate right there. If you'd like to make a free will offering to offset the cost of those books, but those books are free for you, please feel free to take one.
And the books are signed by me, but if you want a personal signature or anything for a friend, I would be more than happy to do that. So you've been wonderful. I want to thank you very much. My goal is to help caregivers learn, cope, and survive, and so we can all sort of do that together. Thank you.
Thank you very
much.
much, Governor.